The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt in Twin Falls, Idaho, sending up a cloud of dust that made Katherine Foster cough into her threadbare handkerchief as she peered through the window at what would now be her home. The July heat of 1882 pressed against the wooden coach like a living thing, and when she finally stepped down onto the packed earth of the main street, the sole of her right shoe gave way completely, flopping open like a hungry mouth and exposing her stockinged foot to the scorching ground. "Careful there, miss," the driver said, but his attention was already on unloading her single trunk. The only possession she had left after her father's debts had consumed everything else back in Philadelphia. Katherine stood motionless for a moment, feeling the heat radiating up through the thin stocking, aware that every eye on the street had turned toward her. The torn shoe was merely the final indignity in a journey that had stripped away every last shred of her former life. 3 months ago, she had been the daughter of a respected merchant. Now she was a mail-order bride, promised to a man named Gerald Thompson, a rancher she had never met, based on 3 carefully worded letters that had promised security and a fresh start. She bent to pick up her small traveling bag, trying to keep weight off her exposed foot, when a shadow fell across her. Katherine looked up, shading her eyes against the bright sun, and found herself staring at the tallest man she had ever seen. He wore a dusty brown Stetson, and his face was weathered but young, perhaps 25 or 26, with eyes the color of whiskey that regarded her with something between concern and curiosity. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "you waiting on someone?" "Mr. Gerald Thompson," Katherine said, trying to maintain her dignity despite standing with one foot awkwardly lifted. "I am his intended." Something flickered across the cowboy's face, gone too quickly for her to identify. "I see. Well, madam, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but Gerald Thompson passed on about 2 weeks ago. Heart gave out while he was mending fence." The words hit Katherine like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, and the tall cowboy's hand shot out to steady her elbow. The street seemed to tilt around her. Everything she owned was in that trunk. She had exactly $4.32 in her reticule. And now the man who had promised her security, who had sent her the train fare, who had offered her a future, was dead. "I did not know," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the town. "His letters, they stopped coming, but I thought perhaps he was busy with the ranch work." The cowboy's grip on her arm was gentle but firm. "Come on out of this sun before you faint. Let me help you to the hotel." "I cannot afford the hotel," Katherine said bluntly. There was no point in pretense now. "I have very little money." The cowboy was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Well, first things first, you cannot walk anywhere in those shoes." "My name is Robert Armstrong, madam. I work the ranch next to where Gerald's place was. Let me at least get you some proper footwear." "I cannot accept charity from a stranger," Katherine said automatically, though even as she spoke, she could feel the heat blistering through her stocking. "It is not charity," Robert said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up at him again. "It is common decency. No one should have to stand in the street with torn shoes after getting news like that." Before Katherine could protest further, Robert had signaled to a young boy loitering near the general store. He pressed a coin into the boy's hand and gestured toward Katherine's trunk. Then, without asking permission, he simply scooped Katherine up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "Mr. Armstrong," Katherine gasped, her face flushing crimson. "Put me down this instant. People are staring." "Let them stare," Robert said calmly, already striding across the street toward the general store. "Better they stare than you burn your feet clear through." Despite her embarrassment, Katherine found herself noticing details about him. He smelled of leather and sage and honest sweat. His arms were solid as oak branches, and he carried her as easily as if she were a child. There was a thin scar along his jawline, barely visible beneath several days' worth of stubble. And when he glanced down at her to make sure she was all right, she saw something in his eyes that was neither pity nor judgment, just straightforward kindness. The interior of the general store was blessedly cool. Robert set Katherine down carefully on a chair near the counter, keeping a hand on her shoulder until he was sure she was steady. The proprietor, a stout man with impressive mutton chops, looked up from his ledger. "Robert Armstrong, what brings you to town on a weekday?" "Need boots for the lady, Jim," Robert said. "Good sturdy ones, and some stockings, too." Jim's eyebrows rose as he took in Katherine's disheveled appearance and ruined shoes, but he was tactful enough not to comment. "What size, miss?" Katherine told him, her voice barely above a whisper. She watched as Jim disappeared into the back room and Robert leaned against the counter with easy familiarity, his attention never straying far from her. She should have felt uncomfortable under his scrutiny, but instead, she felt oddly protected. "I truly cannot let you do this," Katherine said quietly. "You do not even know me." "I know you just traveled all the way from," he paused, waiting. "Philadelphia," she supplied. "From Philadelphia to marry a man you never met, which takes courage. I know you got off that stage to bad news and worse luck, and I know those shoes would not last another hour." Robert pulled a worn leather wallet from his pocket. "Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. You can pay me back when you get settled." "Settled where?" The words came out more bitter than Katherine intended. "I have nowhere to go, Mr. Armstrong. I came here to be married. That was my only plan." Robert was quiet for a long moment. Jim returned with 2 pairs of boots and several pairs of stockings. Katherine tried on the first pair of boots. They were simple brown leather, well-made and practical. They fit perfectly. "These are fine," she said, trying not to think about the cost. She began to remove them, but Robert shook his head. "Keep them on. Jim, we will take those and the stockings, and put together a parcel of practical clothes. Couple of work dresses, a riding skirt if you have one, whatever a lady might need for ranch living." "Ranch living," Katherine echoed. "Mr. Armstrong, I do not understand." Robert paid Jim without answering, counting out bills that Katherine knew must represent a significant portion of his wages. When Jim had bustled off to prepare the parcel, Robert crouched down in front of Katherine's chair so they were eye to eye. "My spread is not fancy, but it is mine. 300 acres that I have been working the last 4 years. I've got a decent house, a good well, cattle that are finally starting to pay. What I do not have is help. Running a ranch alone is brutal work, and I have been thinking about placing an advertisement for help for months now." Katherine's heart began to pound. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that you need a place to stay and I need help. You can cook." "Yes, of course. Sew, mend, keep house. I managed my father's household for 3 years before he passed. Then here is my offer. Come work for me. Room and board plus wages. $50 a month. That will give you time to figure out what you want to do next. Maybe you will want to go back east. Maybe you will find other opportunities here. But at least you will not be stranded with nowhere to go." It was a lifeline, and Katherine knew it. It was also potentially scandalous. "Mr. Armstrong, I cannot live in a house with an unmarried man. My reputation would be ruined. The foreman's cabin is empty. It is small, but it has a good stove and a solid roof. You can stay there. The main house is 50 yards away. Plenty of distance for propriety." Robert stood up, settling his hat back on his head. "I am not asking for anything improper, Miss Foster. I am offering honest work for honest pay, but the choice is yours. I will not press you." Katherine looked down at her new boots, then at the ruined shoes lying on the floor beside her chair. She thought of Philadelphia, of the society that had turned its back on her when her father's debts came to light, of the cousins who had made it clear she was no longer welcome in their homes. She thought of Gerald Thompson, a man she had agreed to marry out of desperation, not love, and she thought of this stranger who had shown her more kindness in half an hour than she had received in months. "I accept your offer, Mr. Armstrong," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "And I promise you will not regret it." Something that might have been relief crossed Robert's face. "Just Robert, please, and I am sure I will not." The ride out to Robert's ranch took nearly an hour. Katherine sat beside him on the wagon seat, her trunk secured in the back along with the parcels from the store and supplies Robert had purchased for the ranch. The landscape was unlike anything she had known in Philadelphia. The Snake River cut through the valley, glinting in the afternoon sun, and the brown hills rose around them like the backs of sleeping giants. It was harsh country, unforgiving, but there was a stark beauty to it that caught at something in Katherine's chest. Robert pointed out landmarks as they drove, the stand of cottonwoods that marked the creek running through his property, the distant line of the neighbor's fence, the ridge where he had seen a mountain lion last spring. He spoke easily, without the awkwardness that might have existed between strangers, and Katherine found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of her situation. "You said you managed your father's household," Robert said after a comfortable silence. "What happened, if you do not mind me asking?" Katherine hesitated, then decided honesty was best. If she was going to be working for this man, he might as well know. "My father was a merchant, a good one, or so we all believed. When he died last fall, we discovered he had been living far beyond his means for years. There were debts. Significant ones. Everything was sold to pay creditors. The house, the furniture, my mother's jewelry, everything. Where is your mother? She passed when I was 14. There is just me." Katherine smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture. "I stayed with cousins for a time, but I was an obligation they had not planned for. When I saw Mr. Thompson's advertisement seeking a wife, it seemed like a solution, a fresh start in a new place. And instead, you ended up working for a different rancher," Robert said, but there was no mockery in his tone. "Fate has a strange sense of humor sometimes." "Do you believe in fate, Robert?" He considered this. "I believe in hard work and fair dealing. I believe in treating people decent and earning what you get. As for the rest, I suppose we make our own fate most of the time." They turned off the main road onto a narrow track that wound through sagebrush and bunch grass. Then Robert's ranch came into view, and Katherine felt her breath catch. It was not grand, but it was well kept. The main house was built of logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A barn stood to one side, freshly painted red, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. Everything spoke of hard work and careful attention. The foreman's cabin sat a little way from the main house, just as Robert had said. It was small, perhaps 15 feet square, but when Robert helped her down from the wagon and opened the door, Katherine found it clean and snug. There was a narrow bed with a corn husk mattress, a small table with 2 chairs, a cast iron stove, and even a braided rag rug on the floor. A single window looked out toward the mountains. "Previous foreman left about a year ago to start his own place," Robert explained, setting her trunk just inside the door. "I have been using it for storage, but I cleaned it out last month. There are linens in that chest, and the stove draws well. I will bring fresh water from the well." Katherine walked slowly around the small space, touching the back of a chair, testing the firmness of the mattress. It was humble, certainly nothing like the spacious bedroom she had once occupied in Philadelphia. But it was clean and private, and most importantly, it was hers. For the first time since her father's death, she had a place that belonged to her, even if only temporarily. "It is perfect," she said, and meant it. Robert smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Good. Get yourself settled then. Supper is usually around 7. Come up to the main house when you are ready, and I will show you around properly." After he left, Katherine sat down on the bed and let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. This morning she had woken on a train, girding herself to meet a man she would marry. Tonight she was in a foreman's cabin on a cattle ranch, employed by a cowboy who had shown her unexpected kindness. It was overwhelming and terrifying, and somehow, also the first thing that had felt right in months. She changed out of her travel-stained dress into one of the simple calico dresses Robert had purchased for her. It fit reasonably well, though she would need to take in the waist. She brushed out her long, dark hair and pinned it up properly, washed her face in the basin of water Robert had left, and then, with her new boots laced firmly on her feet, she walked across the dusty yard to the main house. Robert was in the kitchen, standing over the stove with a look of concentration that made Katherine want to smile. He had changed shirts and slicked back his hair, though it was already falling forward again. When he heard her step, he looked up with an expression of unmistakable relief. "I am glad you are here. I have been trying to make biscuits for the last 20 minutes, and I think I have created something that could be used as ammunition instead." Katherine looked at the bowl of dough he was working. It was gray and tough-looking, thoroughly overworked. "You did not add enough water and you mixed it too long. Biscuits need a light hand." "That would explain why mine always turn out like rocks." Robert stepped back from the counter. "Would you mind?" "It is why you hired me," Katherine said, rolling up her sleeves. "Though I think we will need to start fresh. This dough is beyond saving." They worked together to prepare supper, and Katherine found herself enjoying the simple domestic rhythm of it. Robert was easy to work alongside, taking direction without ego, handing her things before she asked. The kitchen was well equipped, better than she had expected, and she learned that Robert's mother had died the previous year, leaving him the good pots and dishes that now filled the cabinets. "She would have liked you," Robert said suddenly, watching Katherine roll out new biscuit dough. "My ma. She always said the measure of a person was how they handled trouble. You got off that stage to the worst news possible, and here you are making biscuits like it is the most natural thing in the world." "What else should I do?" Katherine asked. "Fall apart? That would not solve anything. Most people would at least complain. I gave up complaining when I realized it did not change circumstances, only made them harder to bear." Katherine cut out biscuits with a glass, placing them carefully on the baking sheet. "Besides, I have been given a second chance I did not expect." "That seems like something to be grateful for, not to complain about." They ate supper at the kitchen table as the sun set outside the window, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The biscuits were light and fluffy, and Robert ate 4 of them with butter and honey, declaring them the best thing he had tasted in months. Katherine felt a warm glow of pride at his genuine appreciation. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "What does a typical day look like?" Robert leaned back in his chair, cradling his coffee cup. "Up before dawn. Check the stock, make sure they have got water and good grazing. Mend fence, which is never-ending work. During calving season, you barely sleep at all. In summer, there is haying to be done. I hire extra hands for that and for roundup. Come winter, it is mostly about keeping the animals fed and healthy through the cold months." It sounds like hard work. It is. But it is mine. Every acre of this place I earned through sweat and determination. Nobody handed me anything. There was pride in his voice, but also bone-deep weariness. "Though I will admit, trying to do it all alone has been taking its toll. What about the previous foreman? You said he left to start his own place. Tom: Yes, he saved up enough to buy land up near Boise. Good man. I was happy for him, but I have not been able to find anyone to replace him. Most men want to work for the big outfits where the pay is better. Small operations like this one, they do not attract much interest. Katherine washed the dishes while Robert dried, and she felt the strangeness of the domestic scene. This morning, she had expected to be doing this as Gerald Thompson's wife. Instead, she was here with a man she had met only hours ago, and somehow it felt comfortable in a way her impending marriage never had. I should let you rest, Robert said when the kitchen was clean. It has been a long day for you. Tomorrow I will show you the rest of the place properly, introduce you to the animals, explain the routine. Robert, Katherine said as he walked her to the door. Thank you for everything. The boots, the job, this chance. You did not have to do any of it. He looked down at her in the lamplight, his expression serious. Maybe not, but it was the right thing to do. Sleep well, Katherine. She walked back to the cabin under a sky so full of stars it took her breath away. Philadelphia had never had stars like this. She prepared for bed, changing into the simple nightgown that had been included in the parcels from the store, and lay down on the corn husk mattress. Despite everything that had happened, despite the uncertainty of her future, Katherine fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the absolute quiet of the countryside. She woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and pale pre-dawn light filtering through the cabin window. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory returned, and with it the realization that this was the first day of her new life. Katherine dressed quickly in her work clothes and walked to the main house. Robert was already in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee. He looked surprised to see her. You did not need to be up this early. I was going to start breakfast before heading out to check the herd. If I am your housekeeper, I should be making breakfast, Katherine said firmly. You go to your work. By the time you return, there will be food ready. Robert looked like he wanted to argue, but then he simply nodded, grabbed his hat, and headed out. Katherine explored the kitchen properly, taking stock of what was available. There were eggs from chickens she could hear clucking outside, bacon hanging in the cool pantry, flour, sugar, salt, coffee, and various staples. She set to work, and by the time Robert returned nearly an hour later, there were eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and fresh coffee waiting. I could get used to this, Robert said, sitting down at the table with evident pleasure. I have been eating my own cooking for so long, I forgot what real food tastes like. After breakfast, true to his word, Robert gave Katherine a proper tour of the ranch. He showed her the chickens she would be collecting eggs from, the vegetable garden that had been sadly neglected and needed attention, the springhouse where butter and milk were kept cool. He introduced her to his horses, including a gentle mare named Daisy that he said Katherine could ride whenever she wanted. You know how to ride? He asked. I did when I was younger. I am sure it will come back to me. They walked out to where the cattle were grazing, perhaps 60 head by Katherine's count. Robert pointed out the boundaries of his property, explaining the challenges of water rights and grazing management with an enthusiasm that made his love for this land evident. Your father was a rancher? Katherine asked. No, a blacksmith in town. I worked for him until I was 21, then used what I had saved to buy this land. It was scrub then, barely worth what I paid, but I saw potential. Robert gazed out over his property with satisfaction. 4 years later, and I am finally starting to see returns. Another good year or two, and I will be able to expand the herd, maybe buy that adjacent parcel that is coming up for sale. Katherine heard the dreams in his voice, and something in her chest tightened. She had not realized how much she had missed being around people who built things, who planned for the future with hope rather than dread. The days began to take on a rhythm. Katherine woke early, made breakfast, and sent Robert out to his work with a full stomach and a packed lunch. She spent her mornings cleaning the main house, which had suffered from months of bachelor neglect, and tending to the vegetable garden. Afternoons were for laundry, mending, bread-making, and preparing supper. Evenings, after the meal was done and the dishes washed, Robert would often sit with her on the porch, talking about the day, the ranch, their pasts. Katherine learned that Robert was 26, that he had 2 sisters married and living in Oregon, that his father had died when Robert was 19, leaving him to support his mother until her own passing the year before. She learned that he loved this land with a fierce devotion, that he could be stubborn and proud but also generous and kind. She learned that he sang off-key while working, that he was patient with animals but frustrated by paperwork, that he had a quiet sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. Robert learned that Katherine was 23, that she could recite poetry from memory, that she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher before her father's business had consumed that possibility. He learned that she was stronger than she looked, that she did not shy away from hard work, that she had a sharp mind for numbers, and helped him sort out his accounts one evening, finding an error that saved him $20. He learned that her laughter was rare but genuine, and that when she smiled fully, it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Katherine felt herself settling into the life of the ranch in a way that surprised her. The work was hard, certainly harder than managing a Philadelphia townhouse, but it was also satisfying. She could see the results of her efforts immediately. The house was clean and organized. The garden was thriving under her care. Robert no longer had to choose between work and eating decent meals. And through it all, something was growing between them that neither acknowledged directly but both felt. It was in the way Robert's eyes sought her out when he returned from working. It was in the careful way Katherine ensured his favorite foods appeared regularly at supper. It was in the lengthening evening conversations, the comfortable silences, the moments when their hands would brush accidentally and both would feel that spark of contact. It was late August when things changed. Katherine was in the garden picking tomatoes, her sleeves rolled up and her skirt pinned back when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see Robert riding in with another man, someone she did not recognize. They dismounted at the barn, and Katherine saw them talking seriously. Robert's body language tense. She returned to the house, putting on coffee because serious conversations often required it. A few minutes later, Robert entered with the other man, a tall fellow with gray in his beard and sharp, assessing eyes. "Katherine, this is Martin Sanders. He owns the ranch to the south. Martin, this is Miss Katherine Foster, my housekeeper." "Miss Foster," Martin said, touching his hat. His eyes traveled over her with an expression Katherine could not quite read. "Robert tells me you have been managing his household these past weeks." "Yes, sir," Katherine said, pouring coffee for both men. "Is there something I can help you with?" Martin accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "In a manner of speaking, I am here on somewhat delicate business." Robert's jaw was tight. "Martin heard in town that I had a woman living on my property. People are talking, Katherine." Katherine's heart sank. She had known this was a possibility, but in the comfortable routine of the past weeks, she had allowed herself to forget about the judgment of others. "People always talk," Martin said, not unkindly, "especially in a small town like Twin Falls. The story going around is that you are living together improperly, which I can see from being here is not exactly true. But appearances matter, especially for a young lady's reputation. Katherine stays in the foreman's cabin, Robert said, his voice hard. Everything has been completely proper. I am sure it has been, Martin said, but perception and truth are not always the same thing. I am not here to judge, Robert. Hell, if my Evelyn had not insisted, I would not have ridden out at all, but she thought Miss Foster should know what is being said. Katherine set down the coffee pot carefully, trying to keep her hands from shaking. What exactly is being said, Mr. Sanders? Martin had the grace to look uncomfortable. That you are Robert's mistress, that you came here under false pretenses. Some are even suggesting you never were engaged to Gerald Thompson at all, that it is all a story. Anger flared hot in Katherine's chest. I have the letters from Mr. Thompson. I have the train ticket he sent. I have proof of everything. I am sure you do, Martin said. But truth does not always win against gossip. I am sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but Mrs. Sanders thought you should know. There are some in town who will not do business with anyone they consider immoral. This could affect Robert's ability to hire hands to sell his cattle to get credit at the bank. Katherine felt sick. She had brought this on Robert. Her presence here, however innocent, was threatening everything he had worked for. Then I should leave. No, Robert said immediately, forcefully. This is not your fault, Katherine. You have done nothing wrong. But I am causing harm simply by being here. The two men exchanged glances. Then Martin said carefully, There is one way to settle this permanently. If you two were married, the talk would stop immediately. A man can certainly have his wife keeping his house without scandal. The word hung in the air between them. Married. Katherine looked at Robert and saw her own shock mirrored in his face. They had not known each other even a month, and yet the suggestion was not without merit. It would solve the practical problem of the gossip. It would secure Katherine's position. It would give Robert back his reputation. But marriage was not something to be entered into lightly, especially a marriage of convenience to solve a social problem. That is certainly one solution, Robert said slowly, but it is a significant step. It is, Martin agreed, but you two seem to work well together. I have seen marriages start with much less compatibility and turn out fine, just something to consider. He finished his coffee and stood. I should be getting back. Evelyn will want to know I delivered the message. Whatever you decide, Robert, you know you have my support. Miss Foster, it was a pleasure meeting you. After Martin left, Katherine and Robert stood in the kitchen in awkward silence. Finally, Katherine said, I truly am sorry. I never meant to bring trouble to you. You have not brought trouble. Small-minded people have. Robert ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. Damn it, Katherine, you have been nothing but helpful. This place runs smoother than it has in years. I eat better, the house is clean, even the accounts are organized, and now you are being slandered for it. What Martin suggested, Katherine began carefully. About marriage, is that something you would even consider? Robert looked at her for a long moment. If we are being honest, I have been considering it for the past week. Not because of gossip, I did not know about that. But because having you here has made me realize how much I was missing, trying to do everything alone. You are smart and capable, and you work harder than most men I have hired. And I enjoy your company. Katherine's heart was beating very fast. I enjoy your company as well. But marriage is more than just enjoying someone's company, Robert continued. It is a partnership for life. And I would not want you to feel pressured into it because of circumstances. You have already had one engagement forced on you by necessity. I do not want to be another Gerald Thompson, someone you accept because you have no choice. The comparison stung because it was partially true. Katherine had agreed to marry Gerald Thompson out of desperation. But what she felt when she looked at Robert was nothing like the resignation she had felt about Gerald. With Robert, there was genuine affection, respect, and if she was honest with herself, the stirrings of something deeper. "You are nothing like Mr. Thompson," Katherine said quietly. "Gerald Thompson was a stranger who offered me security. You are someone I have come to know and care for over these past weeks, someone I respect and trust. Is that enough, though, for marriage?" Katherine thought about the marriages she had known in Philadelphia. Her parents had married for love and had been happy until her mother's death. Her cousins had made society matches based on money and status and seemed largely indifferent to their spouses. Which was better? Which lasted? "I think it could be," she said finally. "If both people are honest with each other and willing to work at it. We already work well together. We already respect each other. Is that not a better foundation than many marriages have?" Robert moved closer, and Katherine could smell the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and summer air. "If we did this, I would want you to know it would be a real marriage, not just a legal arrangement. I would be your husband in every sense, and I would expect you to be my wife." Heat rose in Katherine's cheeks at the implication, but she met his eyes steadily. "I understand. Then I am asking you properly. Katherine Foster, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" It was the second time in 3 months that Katherine had been proposed to. But this time, when she said yes, it was not out of desperation. It was because she wanted to. Because in the few short weeks she had known Robert Armstrong, he had shown her more genuine care and respect than anyone had in years. Because she could imagine a future here, building something lasting with this man. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." Robert's face broke into a smile that made him look years younger. Then, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and careful, a first kiss full of promise. Katherine's eyes fluttered closed, and she let herself lean into it, her hand coming up to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own. When they pulled apart, both were slightly breathless. "We should do it soon," Robert said. "Before the gossip spreads any further, this weekend if Pastor Williams is available." "This weekend," Katherine agreed, feeling slightly dazed. "That is very soon." Having second thoughts, "No," Katherine said, and realized she meant it. "No second thoughts, just trying to adjust to how quickly my life keeps changing." They were married 4 days later in the small church in Twin Falls. Martin Sanders and his wife Evelyn served as witnesses, and Evelyn brought Katherine a simple bouquet of wildflowers. Katherine wore the best of the dresses Robert had bought her, a deep blue calico that Evelyn helped her press and trim with a bit of lace. Robert wore a new shirt and had gotten a proper haircut and shave, making him look almost civilized. The ceremony was short and simple. Pastor Williams kept it traditional, speaking about the sanctity of marriage, the commitment it required, the blessing it could be. When Robert slipped the wedding ring onto Katherine's finger, a simple gold band he had purchased at the general store, she felt the weight of it like a brand, marking her as his. "You may kiss your bride," Pastor Williams said with a smile. This kiss was different from their first. It was witnessed, sanctioned, a public declaration. Robert's hand cupped Katherine's face gently, and when their lips met, Katherine felt something settle into place deep in her chest. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. The Sanders invited them to dinner to celebrate, but Robert politely declined, saying they wanted to spend the evening at the ranch. The ride home was quiet, both of them processing what they had just done. When they arrived, Robert helped Katherine down from the wagon, but instead of releasing her, he kept his hands on her waist. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I know this has all happened very fast." "I am all right," Katherine said. "Are you?" "Better than all right. I just want to make sure you do not feel trapped. that you know this is a real partnership. Your opinions matter. Your feelings matter. This is your home now, not just a place you work." Katherine reached up and touched his face, feeling the scratch of stubble already growing back. "I know. And I promise I will tell you if I am not all right. But right now, truly, I am happy." They went inside together, and the house that Katherine had been cleaning and organizing for weeks felt different now. It was not just Robert's house anymore. It was theirs. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Katherine prepared supper while Robert did the evening chores, the routine familiar, but charged with new significance. When he came back in, they ate at the kitchen table as they had dozens of times before, but now Katherine was wearing a wedding ring, and there was an awareness between them of what would come after the meal was finished. Robert helped her with the dishes, something he had started doing without being asked. As Katherine dried the last plate, she felt his presence behind her, close but not touching. "I do not want to rush you," he said quietly. "We have all the time in the world." Katherine turned to face him, setting down the towel. "I am your wife, Robert. I knew what that meant when I agreed to marry you. Knowing and being ready are different things." "Are you trying to talk yourself out of our wedding night?" Katherine asked with a touch of humor. That startled a laugh out of Robert. "No, madam, I am trying to be respectful of a lady's nerves." "I am nervous," Katherine admitted, "but I am also certain I made my choice with open eyes." Robert took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Then come with me." He led her through the house to his bedroom, the room Katherine had cleaned but never entered when he was in it. It was simply furnished with a large bed, a dresser, and a washstand. The window was open, letting in the cool evening air and the sounds of crickets. Robert lit the lamp on the bedside table, then turned to Katherine. In the golden light, his eyes were warm. "I have thought about this," he admitted. "About you here like this, more than I probably should have, considering you were just my housekeeper at the time." "I thought about it too," Katherine confessed, feeling her cheeks heat. "Wondered what it would be like. And now we get to find out." He kissed her again, deeper than before, his hands moving to the buttons of her dress. Katherine's fingers found the buttons of his shirt, and they undressed each other slowly, learning the contours of each other's bodies. There was awkwardness, certainly, and nervousness, but there was also tenderness and care. Robert was gentle with her, patient, making sure she was comfortable and willing every step of the way. When they finally came together, Katherine gasped at the intimacy of it, at the feeling of being completely connected to another person. Robert held her close, murmuring reassurances, moving slowly until the initial discomfort faded into something else entirely. Something that built and built until Katherine cried out, clutching at his shoulders as pleasure washed over her in waves. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Katherine's head on Robert's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His hand traced lazy patterns on her back. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "More than all right," Katherine said, meaning it. She had heard other women speak of the marriage bed as a duty to be endured. But what she had just experienced with Robert had not felt like duty. It had felt like connection, like intimacy in the truest sense. "Good," Robert said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Because I intend to do that again. Frequently." Katherine laughed, feeling free and happy in a way she had not in longer than she could remember. "I have no objections to that plan." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Katherine woke in the night to find herself still in Robert's arms. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. This was her life now. This man, this ranch, this vast Idaho territory so different from everything she had known. And instead of feeling scared or lost, she felt like she had finally found where she belonged. The weeks that followed their marriage were a revelation. Katherine had expected adjusting to married life would be difficult, but instead she and Robert fell into their partnership with surprising ease. The physical intimacy between them grew more confident and comfortable. Katherine loved waking up in Robert's arms, loved the way he would pull her close in the night, loved the casual touches he gave her throughout the day as if he needed to reassure himself she was real. But it was more than just physical. They talked about everything, making decisions together about the ranch. When Katherine suggested they expand the chicken coop so she could sell eggs in town, Robert not only agreed but spent a weekend building it. When Robert worried about having enough hay stored for winter, Katherine helped him calculate exactly how much they needed and where they could cut costs elsewhere to afford hiring extra help for the haying. September brought cooler weather and the roundup. Robert hired 3 temporary hands, and Katherine found herself cooking for 5 instead of 2. It was exhausting work, but she threw herself into it, determined to prove she could handle the demands of being a ranch wife. The hired men were respectful, tipping their hats to her and complimenting her cooking. She knew they were reporting back to town that Mrs. Armstrong ran a proper household, and she was glad for it. Martin Sanders and his wife Evelyn became regular visitors. Evelyn was a stout, practical woman in her 40s who had raised 4 children while helping Martin build his ranch. She took Katherine under her wing, teaching her the particular skills needed for frontier life. How to render fat for soap, how to preserve meat, how to make do and mend when the nearest store was an hour away. "You are doing well," Evelyn told Katherine one afternoon while they worked together in the kitchen, putting up tomatoes from the garden. "I will admit, I had my doubts when Martin first told me about you, a city girl playing at being a rancher's wife. But you have proven me wrong. You work hard and you do not complain." "I have nothing to complain about," Katherine said honestly. "I have a good husband, a comfortable home and meaningful work. That is more than many people can say." "You love him," Evelyn said, not a question. Katherine paused in her work, considering. Love was a word she and Robert had not used with each other, despite the growing affection between them. Their marriage had been practical, a solution to a problem, but somewhere along the way it had become more. "Yes," Katherine said quietly, "I do. I did not expect to, but I do." "Does he know?" "I have not told him." "Why not?" Katherine struggled to put her feelings into words. "Because he married me out of necessity. To stop gossip, to have help with the ranch. I do not want him to feel obligated to return feelings he might not have." Evelyn shook her head. "Katherine, honey, that man looks at you like you hung the moon." "I have known Robert Armstrong since he was a boy learning smithing from his father. I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Whatever started as necessity has become something real. You should tell him." But Katherine was not quite brave enough yet. She held the words close, hoarding them like precious things, afraid that speaking them might somehow break the spell of her happiness. October arrived with frost on the ground and the first hints of winter in the air. The cattle were moved to lower pastures, and Robert spent long days repairing fence and making sure everything was secure before the snow came. Katherine worked alongside him when she could, learning to handle tools and wire, ignoring the blisters on her hands. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Robert said, "I have been thinking about next spring." "What about it?" "I want to buy that adjacent parcel I mentioned. Old man Hendricks is definitely selling, and if I can get it at a fair price, it would nearly double our grazing land. We could increase the herd significantly." "That sounds wonderful," Katherine said. "Can we afford it?" "With this year's cattle sales, I think so." "It would be tight, but manageable." Robert took her hand. "I wanted to make sure you agreed, though. It would mean a lean winter, not much extra for luxuries. and next year would be even harder work, getting the new land ready and managing more cattle. Robert, this ranch is your dream. Of course I agree. Our dream, Robert corrected. You are my partner in this, Katherine. Your opinion matters as much as mine. Something warm bloomed in Katherine's chest. Then yes, I think we should do it. We are young and strong, we can handle the work. And think what it will mean for our future. Our future, Robert repeated, and there was something in his voice that made Katherine look at him. He was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Katherine, I need to tell you something. What is it? I did not marry you because of gossip. I mean, yes, that was the excuse, the reason I gave myself permission to ask. But the truth is, I had already been thinking about it, wanting it. You came into my life like something I did not know I was missing. And these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. Katherine's heart was pounding. Robert, let me finish, he said gently. I know our marriage started as a practical arrangement. I know you agreed because you needed security and I needed help. But for me, it became more than that almost immediately. I love you, Katherine, not just as a partner or a helpmate, but as my wife. As the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. I love you. Tears sprang to Katherine's eyes. I love you too. I have been so afraid to say it, afraid you would not feel the same way. But I do, Robert. I love you so much. He kissed her then, deep and long, and when they finally broke apart, both were smiling. We are quite a pair, Robert said, both of us too scared to say what we were feeling. But we said it now, Katherine whispered. That is what matters. That night their lovemaking had a new dimension. It was not just physical pleasure or even affection. It was love, expressed through touch and whispered words and the ultimate intimacy of their joined bodies. Afterward, Katherine lay in Robert's arms and felt completely content. I have been thinking, Robert said into the darkness, about children. Katherine's hand, which had been tracing patterns on his chest, stilled. What about them? Do you want them? I know we have never discussed it, but I would like to have a family someday. If you want that too. Katherine thought about it. Before her father died, she had assumed she would eventually marry and have children. It had seemed inevitable, part of the natural progression of life. But after his death, when she had been scraping by and planning her loveless marriage to Gerald Thompson, the idea of children had seemed like just another burden. Now, though, imagining a child with Robert's eyes and her determination, a little one to teach and raise in this beautiful, harsh land, the idea was not frightening. It was appealing. I would like that, she said. Not right away, perhaps. We should get through this next year, get the new land established. But yes, I would like to have children with you. Good, Robert said, pulling her closer. Because I want to fill this house with them, 3 or 4 at least, Katherine laughed. 3 or 4, that is quite ambitious. I am an ambitious man, Robert said, kissing her forehead. You should know that by now. Winter came hard and early that year. By November, there was snow on the ground that would not melt until spring. The cold was brutal, unlike anything Katherine had experienced in Philadelphia. But the house was snug, the woodpile was high, and she had Robert to keep her warm at night. They fell into winter routines. Early mornings breaking ice on the water troughs, midday meals of stew and bread. Long evenings by the fire, Robert reading aloud from newspapers while Katherine sewed or mended. The work was constant but manageable, and Katherine found she did not mind the isolation. She had everything she needed right here. Christmas was simple but perfect. Katherine made a special dinner with a small ham Martin Sanders had traded them for some of her preserved vegetables. She baked pies and cookies, filling the house with the scent of cinnamon and sugar. Robert surprised her with a present, a beautiful shawl he had secretly ordered from a catalog, deep blue wool soft as a cloud. "It is too much," Katherine protested, even as she wrapped it around her shoulders. "Nothing is too much for you," Robert said. "You gave up everything you knew to come west. You have worked yourself to exhaustion helping me build this ranch. You deserve beautiful things." Katherine's present to him was more practical but no less heartfelt. She had been secretly sewing a new quilt for their bed, using scraps of fabric and working on it only when Robert was out of the house. It was a wedding ring pattern, appropriate for their marriage, and when she showed it to him on Christmas morning, his face lit up. "Katherine, it is beautiful." "You made this yourself, every stitch," she confirmed. "I wanted you to have something that showed how much us means to me." They made love under the new quilt that night, and Katherine thought this was what happiness felt like. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. January and February were the hardest months. The cold was relentless, and they lost 2 calves to wolves despite Robert's best efforts. Money was tight, and Katherine stretched every dollar as far as it would go, making soup from bones and patching clothes until they could not be patched anymore. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. March brought the first hints of spring and news that old man Hendricks was ready to sell his land. Robert negotiated hard, and in the end, they got the parcel for less than the asking price. It took every dollar from the cattle sales plus a small loan from the bank, but the land was theirs. Walking the boundaries of their expanded property, Robert pulled Katherine close. "This is just the beginning," he said. 5 years from now, this will be one of the most successful ranches in the territory. 10 years from now, we will be able to send our children to the best schools, give them opportunities we never had." "You are already a success," Katherine said. "You built this from nothing, Robert. You should be proud." "We built this," he corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." Spring brought the backbreaking work of preparing the new land and calving season. Katherine was up at all hours, helping Robert with difficult births, warming chilled calves by the stove, catching whatever sleep she could in between. She was exhausted and filthy and happier than she had ever been. It was during calving season that Katherine first suspected she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses, which had always been regular, did not come. She felt odd in the mornings, vaguely queasy. Her breasts were tender. She said nothing to Robert at first, not wanting to raise his hopes until she was certain. But when another month passed, and there was still no sign of her courses, she could not keep it to herself any longer. One evening after supper, as they sat together on the porch watching the spring sky turn pink and gold, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I think you are going to be a father," she said quietly. Robert's eyes went wide. "You are sure?" "Fairly sure." "I am nearly 2 months late, and I feel different. Strange. Evelyn says that is how it starts." "You told Evelyn before me." Robert tried to sound offended but could not quite manage it over his obvious joy. "I needed to be certain before I got your hopes up." "But yes, Robert, I think we are going to have a baby." He let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby pasture and swept Katherine up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down before she got dizzy. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby. In the late fall, I think, November or December." Robert's hands were gentle on her stomach, as if he could already feel the life growing there. "This is the best thing that has ever happened to me." "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." "I love you," Katherine said, the words coming easily now, said often between them. "I love you too. Both of you." The pregnancy progressed normally through the spring and summer. Katherine continued working as much as she could, though Robert fussed over her constantly, trying to make her rest more. By midsummer, Her condition was obvious, and when she went to town with Robert for supplies, she received knowing smiles and congratulations from the townspeople who had gossiped about them less than a year ago. "Look at you," Evelyn said, helping Catherine shop for fabric to make baby clothes. "Glowing like a lantern. This one is going to be healthy and strong, I can tell." "I hope so," Catherine said, one hand resting on her rounded belly. The baby had started moving recently, strange fluttering sensations that made her gasp in wonder. She was connected to this tiny person in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Are you scared?" Evelyn asked perceptively. "Terrified," Catherine admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I do not know what to do?" "Every mother feels that way with the first one," Evelyn assured her. "But you are strong and healthy, and I will be there to help when your time comes. You will be fine." Robert hired 2 permanent ranch hands to help with the increased workload from the new land. Luke and Danny were brothers in their early 20s, hardworking and respectful. With their help, Robert was able to spend more time with Catherine as her pregnancy advanced. By October, Catherine was large and uncomfortable, ready for the baby to come. She had prepared everything she could think of. A cradle Robert had built stood ready beside their bed. Tiny gowns and blankets were washed and folded. The house was spotlessly clean. Now there was nothing to do but wait. The baby came on a cold November night, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Catherine woke to cramping pains and knew immediately what was happening. She shook Robert awake. "It is time. Go get Evelyn." Robert was up and dressed in minutes, riding through the darkness to fetch Evelyn from the Sanders ranch. Catherine paced through the contractions, breathing through the pain, trying to remember everything Evelyn had told her about what to expect. By the time Robert returned with Evelyn, the pains were coming closer together. Evelyn took one look at Catherine and sent Robert out of the bedroom. "This is women's work," she said firmly. "You go boil water and wait. We will call you when it is over." The next hours were the hardest of Catherine's life. The pain was intense, overwhelming, unlike anything she had experienced. But Evelyn was there, coaching her through it, telling her when to push and when to rest. And finally, as dawn light was beginning to show through the window, Catherine felt something give way and heard the most beautiful sound in the world: a baby crying. "It is a boy," Evelyn announced, wrapping the squalling infant in a clean blanket. "A healthy, strong boy." She placed the baby in Catherine's arms, and Catherine looked down at the red, wrinkled face and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. This was her son. Hers and Robert's. "Can Robert come in now?" she asked. Evelyn opened the door and called for Robert, who burst in looking terrified and hopeful all at once. When he saw Catherine holding the baby, alive and well, his face crumpled with relief. "We have a son," Catherine said, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "We have a boy." Robert approached the bed carefully, as if afraid he might break something, and looked down at his son. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Robert took the baby with hands that shook slightly, cradling him against his chest. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at his father with dark, unfocused eyes. "Hello there, little man," Robert said softly. "I am your father, and I promise I am going to do right by you. I am going to give you the best life I can." Watching them together, Catherine felt tears slide down her cheeks. This was her family. This was everything she had never known she wanted. "What should we name him?" Robert asked. They had discussed names earlier in the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Looking at her son now, Catherine knew exactly what his name should be. "Raymond," she said. "After my father. Raymond Foster Armstrong." "Raymond," Robert repeated, testing it out. "Ray for short." "I like it. Welcome to the world, Raymond Armstrong." Evelyn stayed for 3 days, helping Katherine recover and teaching her how to nurse the baby. Once Katherine was on her feet again and Ray was feeding well, Evelyn returned to her own ranch with strict instructions that Katherine was to rest and let Robert and the ranch hands handle the heavy work for the next few weeks. Those first weeks with Raymond were exhausting but magical. Katherine had never known she could love something so fiercely. Every little sound the baby made, every movement, was fascinating. Robert was completely besotted with his son, holding him whenever he could, singing to him in his off-key voice, making grand plans for the boy's future. Winter came again, but this year it felt different. The house was filled with new life, with Raymond's cries and coos, with the constant activity of caring for an infant. Katherine was more tired than she had ever been, but also more content. On Christmas Eve, when Raymond was 6 weeks old, they bundled him up warmly and took him to church in town for his first public appearance. The congregation oohed and awed over the baby, and Pastor Williams blessed him, saying a prayer for health and happiness for the Armstrong family. After the service, Martin Sanders pulled Robert aside. Katherine, holding Raymond and accepting congratulations from various townspeople, saw them talking seriously. When Robert returned, he was smiling. "Martin just offered to buy 50 head of cattle from us in the spring," he reported. "At a good price, too. He says our stock is some of the finest in the territory." "That is wonderful news," Katherine said. "It is more than that," Robert said quietly, taking her hand. "It means we made it, Katherine. The ranch is stable. We have enough money saved to get through any emergency. We own our land free and clear. We have a healthy son and a good life. We actually made it." Katherine looked around at the church, at the friendly faces of their neighbors, at Robert and Raymond, her husband and her son. A year and a half ago, she had stepped off a stagecoach in torn shoes, facing an uncertain future with a man she had never met. Now she stood in sturdy boots Robert had bought her, wearing the wedding ring he had given her, holding the child they had created together, and she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "We did," she agreed softly. "We really did." The years flowed past like the Snake River through the valley, steady and sure. Raymond grew from a baby to a toddler to a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch. When he was 3, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, a tiny thing with Robert's eyes and Katherine's dark hair. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas, who proved to be the most easygoing of all the children. The ranch prospered. With careful management and hard work, Robert expanded the herd even further and bought another parcel of land. He became known throughout Idaho territory as a fair dealer and expert cattleman. Katherine's eggs and preserves became sought after in town, bringing an extra income that she carefully saved. They added on to the house, building 2 more bedrooms to accommodate their growing family. The foreman's cabin where Katherine had spent her first weeks in Idaho was renovated and given to Luke when he married a girl from town. The ranch employed 4 permanent hands now, plus seasonal workers for roundup and haying. Raymond started school in Twin Falls when he was 7, riding into town each day on his pony. He was a quick learner, good with numbers like his mother and practical like his father. Rose declared she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, and Katherine hired a tutor to come out to the ranch twice a week to work with both older children. Through it all, Katherine and Robert's love deepened and matured. The passionate intensity of their early marriage mellowed into something steadier, but no less strong. They had weathered hard times together, years when drought threatened the herd and money was tight. They had celebrated good times, bumper calf crops and high prices at market. They had raised children together, nursed them through illnesses, disciplined them, taught them, loved them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Robert surprised Katherine with a trip to Boise, just the two of them, leaving the children in Evelyn's capable care for a week. They stayed in a hotel with indoor plumbing and electric lights, marvels that were still new enough to be exciting. They ate in restaurants and went to the theater and walked down streets lit by street lamps. "This is amazing," Katherine said as they strolled through the city in the evening. "But you know what?" "What?" Robert asked, his arm around her waist. "I miss home. I miss our ranch, our children, our life. This is nice for a visit, but I would not want to live here." Robert laughed. "Neither would I. Turns out we are both country folk now." "I am not sure I was ever anything else," Katherine said. "I thought I was a city girl, but maybe I was just waiting for the right place to call home." They returned to the ranch renewed and happy, and Katherine threw herself back into the life she loved. She took over the ranch accounts completely, freeing up Robert to focus on the cattle and land management. Her head for numbers and organization made a real difference, and under her financial stewardship, they were able to save more than they ever had before. When Raymond turned 16, Robert started teaching him the business of ranching in earnest. The boy had been helping around the ranch since he was old enough to walk, but now Robert showed him how to evaluate cattle, how to negotiate sales, how to manage hands, all the skills he would need to eventually take over. "He is a good boy," Robert told Katherine one night after Raymond had successfully handled a difficult situation with a balky steer. "You did well with him." "We did well with him," Katherine corrected. "He is yours as much as mine." "Ours," Robert agreed, pulling her close. They were both in their 40s now, streaks of gray in their hair, lines on their faces earned through years of sun and wind and hard work. But when Katherine looked at her husband, she still saw the young cowboy who had carried her across the street in torn shoes, who had bought her boots and given her a chance at a new life. Rose announced at 15 that she wanted to go to the normal school in Boise to become a teacher. It took some negotiation, but eventually Katherine and Robert agreed, on the condition that she lived with Robert's sister's family rather than in a boarding house. Rose left for school the following fall, writing long letters home describing her classes and her new friends. Thomas, at 13, declared he had no interest in ranching and wanted to be a veterinarian instead. Robert was disappointed at first, but Katherine reminded him that they had always wanted their children to have choices they had not had. "Let him find his own path," she said. "The ranch will be here if he ever wants to come back to it, and if he does not, well, Raymond will carry it on." In the spring of their 15th year of marriage, Martin Sanders died suddenly of a heart attack. His funeral was well attended, and afterward, Evelyn confided to Katherine that she was thinking of selling the ranch and moving to Oregon to live with her daughter. "I cannot run that place alone," she said. "And Martin always planned to sell it to Robert anyway. He thought highly of your husband." The negotiations took several months, but in the end, Robert bought the Sanders ranch at a fair price. It more than doubled their holdings, making them one of the largest cattle operations in southern Idaho. They hired a manager to oversee the Sanders place, which they renamed the Twin Rivers Ranch, while they continued to live on and manage what had always been their home. "Remember when we walked these boundaries the first time?" Robert asked Katherine as they rode across their expanded property. "When we bought that first additional parcel and thought we were so ambitious." "I remember thinking you were crazy," Katherine admitted. "Now look at us." "Look at us," Robert repeated. "Tell me something. Are you happy, Katherine, really happy, not just content or satisfied, but truly happy?" Katherine thought about it, looking out over the land they had built together. "I am," she said honestly. "When I stepped off that stagecoach, I thought my life was over. I thought I was going to a loveless marriage of necessity, and I was grateful just for that. But instead, I found you. I found love and partnership and purpose. I found home. So yes, Robert, I am truly happy." "Good," Robert said, leaning over to kiss her, the horses standing patiently beneath them, "because you made me happier than I ever thought possible. That day you arrived with torn shoes, I thought I was just helping someone in need. I had no idea I was meeting my future. The woman who would become my partner in every sense, who would give me children and help me build something lasting. You changed my life, Katherine." "You changed mine first," Katherine said. "You bought me boots and gave me a wedding ring. You gave me a future when I had none. You gave me everything." They rode back to the ranch house as the sun was setting, painting the Idaho sky in shades of orange and red. Raymond was waiting for them, having successfully handled the day's work without supervision. Rose was home from school for the summer, reading on the porch. Thomas was in the barn, doctoring a cow under the supervision of the local veterinarian who had taken the boy under his wing. This was their legacy, Katherine thought. Not just the land or the cattle or the money in the bank. Their real legacy was the family they had created, the children they were sending out into the world with skills and education, and the knowledge that they were loved. It was the community they had become part of, the hands they employed and supported, the town they contributed to. That night, lying in bed with Robert's arms around her, Katherine thought back to that terrified girl who had stepped off the stagecoach with torn shoes and a trunk full of shattered dreams. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this future. But she had been brave enough to accept a stranger's kindness, and that had made all the difference. "What are you thinking about?" Robert murmured, already half asleep. "Just that I would do it all again," Katherine said. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every fear. I would do it all again to end up right here. With me, with you, always with you." Robert's arms tightened around her and Katherine closed her eyes, listening to his breathing slow as he drifted off to sleep. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods. The house creaked and settled, full of the comfortable sounds of home. Katherine Foster Armstrong had found her place in the world. Not in the Philadelphia drawing rooms of her youth, but here in the harsh, beautiful landscape of Idaho, with a man who had shown her kindness when she needed it most, and had loved her every day since. She had arrived with torn shoes and left with boots and a wedding ring, and a life beyond her wildest imaginings. And as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, with her children safe under their roof and their future secure, Katherine knew this was the happy ending she had stopped believing in but had found anyway. This was home. This was love. This was everything. The years continued to unfold with the reliable rhythm of the seasons. As Raymond approached his 20th birthday, it became clear he was ready to take on more responsibility. Robert began formally transitioning some of the ranch management to his son, teaching him the final lessons of leadership and decision-making that could only be learned by doing. Rose graduated from normal school and took a teaching position in Twin Falls, living in a small apartment above the Mercantile, but coming home every weekend to visit. She was courted by several young men, but she was particular, telling her mother she would not settle for anything less than what her parents had. "I want someone who sees me as a partner," she said one afternoon while helping Katherine in the kitchen. "Not just someone to keep their house and raise their children. I want what you and Pa have." "That is wise," Katherine told her. "Never settle for less than you deserve." Thomas finished his schooling and was accepted as an apprentice to a veterinarian in Boise. He came home for holidays and summers, full of stories about his studies and the animals he was learning to treat. Robert had made his peace with Thomas's chosen path, proud that his son was following his passion, even if it was different from his own. It was the spring of their 20th anniversary when Katherine realized she was pregnant again. At 43, she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. The pregnancy was a surprise to everyone, including the doctor who examined her. "Are you sure?" Robert asked, somewhere between delighted and terrified. "At our age, I am sure," Katherine said. "And yes, at our age. The doctor says I am healthy and should be fine, though he wants me to be more careful than I was with the others." Raymond was 19, Rose 17, and Thomas 15 when their youngest sibling was born the following winter. Another girl, this time whom they named Sarah after Robert's mother. The older children doted on their baby sister, and Katherine found that raising a child in her 40s, with financial security and older children to help, was vastly different from her early years of motherhood, when she had been doing everything alone. "She will be spoiled rotten," Robert said, watching Raymond carefully hold his tiny sister. "Look at them. They are going to give her everything she wants." "One spoiled child out of 4 is not bad," Katherine said contentedly, "and she will keep us young." Indeed, Sarah's presence in the house brought new energy. She was a happy baby who grew into a spirited toddler, and Katherine and Robert found themselves experiencing parenthood all over again with the wisdom and patience that came with age. Raymond married at 22, a sensible girl named Helen from a neighboring ranch. They lived in the foreman's cabin that had once housed Katherine, now expanded and improved, and Raymond took over the day-to-day operations of the Armstrong ranch, while Robert focused on the bigger picture of their combined operations. Rose surprised everyone by falling in love with the new doctor who came to Twin Falls, a serious young man from Boston who had come west for adventure. They married when Rose was 21, and she continued teaching while also helping her husband establish his practice. Katherine loved watching her daughter with her husband, seeing the same partnership and mutual respect that she and Robert shared. Thomas qualified as a veterinarian and opened his own practice in Boise, but he came home often to visit and to provide veterinary services for both ranches. He married a girl he met in Boise, a lawyer's daughter who was studying to be a nurse, and they settled into city life with enthusiasm. Through it all, Katherine and Robert remained the center of their growing family. They were grandparents now, with Raymond and Helen producing 3 children in quick succession. The ranch house was always full of noise and activity. Multiple generations gathered around the table for Sunday dinners. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party. The entire town of Twin Falls seemed to turn out, testament to the respect and affection the Armstrongs had earned over the years. There were speeches and toasts, stories told about Katherine's arrival with torn shoes and Robert's gallant rescue. "To think," Katherine said in her brief speech, holding Robert's hand, 25 years ago I stepped off a stagecoach into what I thought would be a loveless marriage of convenience. Instead, I found the love of my life. I found a partner who respected my mind as well as my heart. I found a place to belong and a purpose to fulfill. Robert Armstrong, you bought me boots that first day, but you gave me so much more. You gave me a future, a family, and a love that has sustained me through everything life has thrown at us. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." There was not a dry eye in the room, and when Robert stood to give his own speech, his voice was thick with emotion. "I thought I was just helping a lady in distress that day," he said. "I never imagined that lady would become my whole world. Katherine, you took a struggling rancher with big dreams and helped me make them reality. You raised our children with wisdom and love. You stood beside me through drought and plenty, through hard times and good. You are my partner, my love, my best friend. These 25 years have been the greatest gift of my life." They renewed their vows that day, with Pastor Williams presiding just as he had at their original wedding. Katherine wore a beautiful dress rose, and Helen had secretly made for her deep green silk that matched her eyes. Robert wore a new suit ordered from San Francisco. And when they exchanged rings again, Katherine looked at the gold band she had worn for 25 years and marveled at how a simple piece of metal could represent so much love, so much life lived together. The celebration lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Young Sarah, now 7 years old, fell asleep on her father's lap as the party wound down. Looking around at her family and friends, at the community they had become part of, Katherine felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Life continued its forward march. Raymond and Helen took over the Armstrong ranch completely when Robert turned 55. Though Robert still consulted on major decisions and helped during busy seasons. He and Katherine split their time between the main ranch and the Twin Rivers property, where they had built a smaller house for their retirement years. Sarah grew into a bright, determined young woman who announced at 16 that she wanted to study law. By then, 1907, the world was changing rapidly. Idaho had been a state for 17 years. The frontier was becoming civilized. Women were starting to enter professions that had once been closed to them. "Law," Robert said, trying to wrap his mind around it. "Sarah, that is, well, it is unusual for a woman." "Which is exactly why I want to do it," Sarah said firmly. "Someone has to be first. Besides, you always taught me I could do anything I set my mind to." "Were you lying?" Robert looked at Katherine helplessly. Katherine just smiled. "She has you there. And she is right. You did always tell her she could do anything." Sarah went to law school at the University of Idaho, one of only 3 women in her class. She wrote long letters home describing her studies, the discrimination she sometimes faced, and her determination to succeed. Katherine saved every letter, proud beyond measure of her youngest daughter's courage. As Katherine entered her 60s, she slowed down a bit, letting younger people take over more of the physical labor. But her mind was as sharp as ever, and she continued to manage the financial side of the ranch operations. The Twin Rivers Cattle Company, as they formally incorporated it, was now one of the largest operations in the state, employing dozens of people and contributing significantly to the local economy. Robert's hair had gone completely white, and there were deep lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still strong and vital, still eager to get up each morning and see what the day would bring. He and Katherine rode together most mornings, checking on stock and enjoying the beauty of the land they had spent their lives building. It was on one of these rides, when Katherine was 63 and Robert 67, that Katherine said, "You ever think about that first day, when I arrived?" "All the time," Robert admitted. "I remember seeing you standing there with your torn shoe, trying so hard to maintain your dignity. I remember thinking you had the saddest, bravest eyes I had ever seen." "I was terrified," Katherine said. "And then you appeared, this tall cowboy who just took charge. You did not ask if I needed help. You just helped. Do you know how rare that is?" "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Katherine said firmly. "Most people would have walked on by. Most people would have told themselves it was not their problem. But you stopped. You helped. You changed my life." "We changed each other's lives," Robert said, reaching over to take her hand. Their horses walked side by side, comfortable with each other after years of these morning rides. "I was lonely before you came, though I did not realize it at the time. I was so focused on building the ranch, on success, that I did not see what was missing. You showed me that success does not mean anything if you do not have someone to share it with." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and then Katherine said, "I am ready, you know." "Ready for what?" "Whatever comes next. I have lived a full life, Robert. I have loved deeply and been loved in return. I have raised good children who are making their own way in the world. I have built something lasting with you. Whenever my time comes, I will be at peace with it." "Well, I am not ready," Robert said fiercely. "I plan to have you around for at least another 20 years. We have grandchildren to spoil and maybe great-grandchildren. We have more mornings like this to share." "I plan to be here for all of that too," Katherine assured him. "I was just saying that when the time comes, eventually, I will have no regrets. This life we built together has been everything I could have wanted and more." Robert pulled his horse to a stop and looked at her seriously. "Katherine Foster Armstrong, I loved you the day I met you, though I did not know it yet. I have loved you every day since, and I will love you until I take my last breath. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you to me," Katherine said softly. They continued to live full lives for many more years. They saw Sarah graduate from law school and become the first female lawyer in Twin Falls, opening a practice that focused on helping women and families. They watched their grandchildren grow and start families of their own. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by 4 generations of family. Robert passed away quietly in his sleep at 74, Katherine beside him. He had been in declining health for a few months, his heart slowly giving out, but he had remained mentally sharp and loving until the very end. His last words to Katherine were simply, "I love you, always." The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Robert Armstrong had been a pillar of the community, respected for his business acumen but loved for his fairness and generosity. Katherine stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and knew that she was burying not just her husband but her best friend, her partner, the love of her life. She stayed on in the house they had built together, the house that had started small and grown with their family. Raymond and Helen wanted her to come live with them, but Katherine declined. This was her home. This was where she and Robert had shared 43 years of marriage. She was not ready to leave it. Katherine lived 2 more years after Robert's death, years she spent working on a memoir that Sarah encouraged her to write. She documented their life together. Starting with that day, she stepped off the stagecoach with torn shoes and a broken heart, ending with Robert's peaceful death in the home they had built together. "I want people to know," she told Sarah, "that sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead to the best things. That kindness matters. That love can be found in the most unexpected places. That a pair of boots and a wedding ring can change everything." Katherine Foster Armstrong passed away peacefully at 70, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She was buried beside Robert in the Twin Falls Cemetery, their headstones side by side, their names linked forever. The memoir she wrote became a beloved family document, passed down through generations. The Twin Rivers Cattle Company continued to thrive under Raymond's management, and eventually his sons. The house, where Katherine and Robert raised their family, remained in the family for over 100 years. But more than the land or the business or the physical legacy they left, Katherine and Robert's true inheritance was the love story they created. A story that began with a simple act of kindness, a man buying boots for a woman in need, and grew into a love that spanned decades and changed multiple lives. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually read Katherine's memoir and marvel at how different the world had been in 1882. But the core truth remained unchanged across the generations. Love built on mutual respect, partnership, and genuine caring could weather any storm and build something lasting. And it all started with torn shoes, new boots, and a wedding ring given not out of obligation, but out of a growing love that would last a lifetime.